I'm Marta Alfonso. I'm the partner in charge of litigation in the distressed business services for MBAF, which is one of the Baker Tilly partners in Florida and in New York. And I've been doing this work for more than 20 years. I know I look much younger than that, but I've been doing it for that long. And I've been involved in all kinds of restructurings, both in court and out of court. And I'm also currently a receiver in a matter. And so I'm looking forward to spending the time with you today to share my experiences. I have done operating turnarounds, and I'm an accountant and a lawyer by trade. And a forensic. I look for fraud too.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Marta. Over to you, John.
Yes, good afternoon for everybody, for us here. My name is John Milner. I'm an Irish chartered accountant, but I've been in Mexico for over 25 years. Most of my background, my initial corporate life was financial, CFOs, controller. So I did a lot of experience there with acquisitions, mergers, restructurings, a lot of different restructurings. Went through a process with Chapter 11, US company. And I've been in the consulting business for maybe 15 years. And I'm a partner for a business advisory practice in Mexico. And we do financial consulting, restructuring, turnarounds. I'm a certified fraud examiner. So we have a practice on fraud prevention, investigation. We have an insurance forensic practice, which a lot of we do through Baker Tilly, United States. And we do a lot of what we call GRC, government risk and compliance. So it's it's a pleasure to be here today, and I promise not to make any rugby jokes.
Thank you. Thank you so much, John.
As Ireland hasn't been doing very well in rugby, so.
Thank you so much, John. Adrian, over to you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Well, my name is Adrián Bueno. I am also from Mexico. I am a lawyer, a legal partner here in Baker Tilly, Mexico. So my main practice has been mainly in corporate law, litigation, tax, and also, well, from a few years ago, I became a fanatic of legal tech. So we are developing a lot of technology to automatize procedures in Mexico and in all the law. So it's very nice to be with you right now.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Adrian. Meredith?
Hi, I'm Meredith Engate. I'm an intern at MBAF. I just graduated from law school, and I'm really excited to be here to learn as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Meredith. And just for everyone's benefit, my name is Harsh. I'm the Asia Pacific Regional Director for Baker Tilly International. I look after the firms in Asia Pacific, but at the same time, I also help the Insolvency and Restructuring Group Global Committee with this initiative, building out the service line. And that probably is a good segue for me to just spend 30 seconds and just share with everyone on the call what we have done over this year, over 2020, to develop the insolvency service line. So as you know, the pandemic struck towards the end of 2019 in Asia Pacific, and then we had the spillover effects in Europe and the Western world in Q1 of 2020. So in response to that, as Baker Tilly International, we were anticipating that there's going to be a lot of businesses under distress, and this is a good opportunity for our insolvency service line and restructuring service line to capitalize on the opportunities and make sure that we are there to help our clients service our clients. So earlier in the year, around March 2020, is when we set up the Global Insolvency Committee with Marta looking after the Americas region. Jess Romboldi from Melbourne office looking after the APAC region, and Neil Hughes looking after the Ireland, from the Ireland office, looking after the EMEA region. We prepared a business plan of what we're going to do, how we're going to approach things, and what is it that we want to achieve as a group. We set up a collaboration space on Microsoft Teams, which some of you are familiar with, for sharing of CVs, credentials, rate cards, etc. So we have the best practices, and we're aware of the capabilities within our network. Later on in the year, under Martha's guidance, we developed the treat model and adopted it as a Baker Tilly go-to-market approach, which we're going to focusing on heavily on today's session to explore the treat model and the various facets of it. We also set up the APAC Insolvency Restructuring Business Development Subcommittee to focus on key markets in Southeast Asia, like Singapore, Hong Kong, Thailand, Malaysia, of how we could tap on more clients. We created and circulated regional and global marketing collaterals, which covers 125 partners and directors across 65 Baker Tilly firms, so that we have the contact list, and we can share that with clients so that they get a sense of our regional and global capability. We had subservice definitions for 15 subservices within the insolvency umbrella. So we have uniformity across Baker Tilly firms. So when we talk about insolvency or restructuring or fraud, what does that exactly mean? And we speak the same language across the world as Baker Tilly firms. We had the website, insolvency and restructuring landing page website revamped on the Baker Tilly International website. So it becomes a little more attractive and user-friendly. And of course, this is a work in progress, and more changes are going to happen. In Hong Kong, we've been looking to add insolvency capabilities. We've identified a couple of firms there that we're in conversation with. So this is part of the business plan to expand inorganically in certain key strategic financial centers like Hong Kong. The others on the list include Tokyo and India, which are going to be big markets for insolvency. And that's where I'm having a conversation with the local firm to identify boutique firms that we can bolt on or have lateral hires from other practices that we can add. We're obviously having the training today for New Zealand, but at the same time, we're also organizing a global training on a similar theme and topic on the 4th of December. So connecting all the practitioners, which hasn't happened in the past in Baker Tilly firms. So that's something that's quite exciting, looking forward to on the 4th of December as well. Towards the end of the year in December, we hope to be members of INSOL as part of the G36 group, which means that we are then part of the premier insolvency organization, speaking with accountancy firms and law firms, sharing best practices and guiding INSOL as well as the quasi-government bodies like IMF on what should be done in terms of developing the insolvency service line, helping out businesses and governments. And that's also a badge of honor, which means that our contribution to INSOL is going to be much more. We're going to receive a lot of benefit from INSOL as well. And going into 2021, we've got a couple of projects identified. And those projects include raising the profile of Baker Tilly firms in the insolvency space by creating mini thought leadership video blogs, 3 to 5 minute video blogs with all the leaders from key strategic financial centers, and then posting them on our website, on our social media. So when clients come to us, they can see the practitioners, listen to the videos, our thought leadership, and then hopefully that's going to drive more traffic and raise our profile in the external market. The other thing that we are doing is raising our profile internally by prompting member firms that we have, again, in certain key markets to build out advisory and insolvency service line and diversify their service offering from just an audit and tax practice to adding high margin insolvency work. So again, we'd be looking at certain key markets in places like Africa, like Nigeria and South Africa, and pushing those member firms to build on more insolvency capabilities. And that's where I leverage on all of you, this community, to then share your best practices or advice that they have on how they can build out a practice. So I think there's a lot of good initiatives which are in the pipeline. And again, I want to thank all of you for your time in helping out with that. This is step one for this, is connecting, being on the same platform, training for an event like this, so that we're all on the same page. And when we speak to our clients across the world, across all the Baker Tilly firms, we are consistent in our messaging, and that's going to help our cross-border client work as well. So on that note, that's it from me. Before we jump into it, I'd like this to be a very interactive session, encourage two-way dialogue. So feel free to stop us at any point of time if you have any questions. Turn on the video so we can see your reactions as well. Make sure that we're going in the right direction. Thank you so much, Daniel. And on that note, I'm going to hand over to Marta to take us through the treat model.
Okay, here we go. Thank you so much, Harsh. What we're about to do is to walk through the Distressed Business Services training program that we've put together with Baker Tilly International. And I did want to give a shout out to Kanika from MBAF, who is helping us today with today's presentation. We really appreciate the help. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about business development objectives for distressed businesses. I'm going to try to persuade you up front how important and exciting this area of service is. And the way I look at it is this: I can't save people, but I have the skill sets just like you to save businesses. And that's what this service line is really all about, is helping financially distressed companies in turning them into healthier organizations. I do think about it visually as if you were going to have a patient being wheeled into the emergency room after going through an accident, and they've got all kinds of things going on, and you're trying to make sense of it all in rapid time to be able to begin to repair the damage that's been done so that that particular patient can be wheeled out the back end. So we'll talk about the treat model. We'll talk about some of our terminology for distressed businesses, and we're going to understand the engagement process. Our goal in all of this is we want our clients and non-clients and the ecosystem that makes up the universe of where you can get those distressed businesses to think Baker Tilly International when their distressed business needs. We want to be market relevant. We're not going to be able to win every engagement, nor if Citigroup came to us and said, we're bleeding from all sides, take us on, that wouldn't be for us. But between that and a very small businesses, there are numerous businesses that we can help with, given our experience. We've done work in downturn markets, we've done work with distressed credits, we know about special assets, and we know how to implement strategies to actually maximize asset values. Sometimes our strongest suit is bringing organization to chaos. And so now with that, we come to our first polling question. So Kanika, this is to see if you all are awake. How many clients do you have out there that have or that are in financial distress today? So don't be shy, register your votes so we can see, how many people that you're already thinking about as we're going through this presentation.
I was just going to say I can't vote.
No one voted. So obviously that means that you can't think of anybody right now. And that's okay, because that means a couple of things. Number one, that your antenna hasn't been up, and hopefully by the end of this exercise that we're going to go through today, your antenna will be up. And distressed businesses come in many flavors and forms. So if I had to answer that question, I'd probably be somewhere in the middle. I think in the world of the pandemic, what we're seeing is that companies are either holding their own because of some type of fiscal support from the government, or because the world in some aspects have stopped. But on the other hand, some of our firms are seeing things like the the airplane and the entertainment sectors that are really down. Hospitality is really suffering. Retail in certain places are suffering, either at a dead stop or you're seeing services being offered at substantial discounts.
Martha, just a question, sorry. I'm
Sure.
not sure if were people able to vote?
I'm assuming
No, I couldn't vote hash.
you couldn't
The
vote.
Right.
no.
Okay. Thank you for that feedback. I
Thank
presume
you.
then the answer was you have some financial distress clients,
So,
and
so
we'll take this and
let's
sort it
ask the
out.
question a
Yes.
different way. If I looked at everybody in the audience and said, we put everybody up in the audience here by a show of hands, how many of you have distressful companies? I'd rather know that.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. Jared does, okay? Bill isn't saying anything. Oh, he keeps flashing his hand, so I'm gonna go, that's multiples. How about you, Daniel? Oh, he's flashing too. Okay, good, 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 good. Okay, so then this is gonna be very useful. I apologize for that. You were all kind of low so you could see the screen, but that works out great. Okay, so good. Thank you, John. I appreciate that. So the way that we're going about the development of this business model is we would encourage your group to prepare updated collateral materials for distressed business service. And after you have this presentation, you should be able to do that. Or if you get stuck, let us know and we'll be happy to help you with that. We also created a PowerPoint internally within our organization to sell the triage services. And then we went through and identified specific target lists, which we'll talk about the ecosystem in a minute. We then think it's important to train resources like you're doing today, which is good, and then start scheduling meetings with friends or those that are in distress. And where we often see that being relevant is with law firms, distressed clients, and actual businesses that want to talk to you about helping them. We think financial institutions are a great place to actually market your services in this regard, because they oftentimes have troubled credits that they need help with. And so you can either go in and either diagnose and or monitor their recovery as they try to assist that client. Also, the courts are a very good place to get work as well. We would establish, and we would suggest that you establish templates for the engagement services. You would see the engagement letter, procedures manuals. You're going to see a sample report format in this particular section so that you'd understand what you would include. Then I would go back and get sensitive within your particular geographic area that you work in about monitoring and following up with companies that are having problems or filing bankruptcy. I will tell you that if you go after the troubled institutions and the people they work with, by and large, for those of you that haven't seen those people in distress, you will. And this particular type of work really lends itself to teamwork and team approach, because you need many skill sets to take care of the patient. Here is the treat model. The treat model goes from triage to restore, executing, advising, and transforming. So in the triage, again, think of the patient that's being wheeled into the emergency room. You're assessing and determining the sources and drivers of financial distress. You're proposing what actions should be taken by area of financial distress to straighten them out. In the restore phase, what you do is you take the recommendations and you make detailed work plans. So if you recommend in the triage phase that you want to reduce headcount across the organization by 15%, what the restore phase will do is have you create the work plans that get you there. And the important thing is that we're focused on measurable toll gates that track progress. People, when they're in distress, if you think about it, if you have a fever and you want to know if you're getting better, one visible way for you to know that you're improving is measuring your temperature. And you have less aches, less pains with measuring your temperature. So for us, it's important that when you're setting up these plans, you're actually developing toll gates that talk about improvement in the restructuring, or you're making a decision, or you're signing an agreement, or you're selling off assets, or whatever the action is. In the execution phase, you take a leadership and a managerial role in leading and implementing that restructuring or turnaround. And that means that you would become the chief restructuring officer of the entity or of the division, and you'd work with management. In some cases, I've seen people actually take the leadership role of a company or the financial function to affect the turnaround. Advisory role are all the other aspects of providing guidance and services to help a troubled company relieve its distress. That takes into account what Adrian will be talking about soon, which is legal services. It takes into account audit and accounting, technology, forensics, valuation, M&A work. And so what's neat about that particular phase is once you've diagnosed what the solutions are, and some of them may be to actually perform some of these other services, like doing a legal due diligence or like selling off a division of the company. In this advisory area is where those things come to life. And finally, you survive the illness, the patient sits up in bed and says, "Thank you very much," and they get wheeled out of the room. And now, which is not going to be discussed today, but is certainly is part of this model, is the transformation, taking the patient that is alive, has been fixed, but needs to continue through rehab, if you will, a rehabilitative process. And that's what transforming is about. But that we won't get to today, but that's the end of the model. So I don't know if anybody has any questions at this point. Okay, we'll keep going. So now we're on to our second polling question. So Kanika, do you have financial advisory services in your firm? Since I don't know if you can answer, or maybe we just need to ask the question.
Yeah, you can, well, I was able to answer.
Yeah.
Okay,
By a show of hands, or a little, one of the little hands where you clap, everybody's got, okay, good, it worked, great. So the answer is, the good news about having financial advisory services in your practice is that many of the disciplines that we're going to be talking about encompass a portion, or in some cases, much of the experience that you will have had in that process. So we really do encourage you to put this in as a separate advisory service. We are finding, and I think if you were to survey the practice leaders across the world, you know that a 50% margin is realistic. You tend to get in some of these things premium rates because remember, you're going into the emergency room. This isn't considered commodity type service. They're paying you for this skill set and expertise. So we'll keep going. So this is the ecosystem I wanted to talk a little bit about. And what you'll see here on screen is you've got distressed debtors, and there you're typically going to speak to the CFO or general counsel. I find at times that there's general denial of the reality of being in a troubled company because nobody likes to admit they're in trouble. And that also the belief is if that happens, there could be poaching of customers, employees, loss of prestige, loss of jobs. So all of that is involved in that ecosystem. And oftentimes that just comes by word of mouth. Another area is what we call the bankruptcy bar in the United States, but it's really the bar of attorneys or barristers in your area as to, you know, another source of people that can provide referrals. Creditors, large creditors in these entities oftentimes come back and have information about companies that are in trouble. And there, if you have clients in that space, it's great to get referrals from them to help you contact those institutions that would have those types of problems. Financial institutions are a great source, just a great source of that type of business, again, because they'll ask you to come in and do a triage assessment. They'll ask you to come in and monitor the performance. They'll ask you to come in and actually get involved with field audits if they're having issues with their borrowing base, all of those areas. And then other sources, everything you could imagine. It could be a board director. It could be a judge. It could be a person in the company that finds out there's severe financial distress and there's a fraud and they don't know who to go to, and they come to your firm through some type of whistleblower process. So you never really know. But keeping your ears to the ground and keeping aware of these opportunities will find you in the emergency room eventually. These next two slides address the advisory services on a service view business. This is from the point of view if you're the patient, okay? So you're the troubled company, you come in and you're in distress. What can our firms provide to these businesses? Again, the assessment of threat and what to do. The analysis of building the various scenarios to be able to understand what my cash position is going to be like. Developing the plans, implementing all those plans. And in the advisory side, you're going to see that, again, selling off divisions, being advisor to someone in bankruptcy, being an advisor to someone in other types of wind up structures that are either receiverships or some type of liquidation process, and then providing the actual operational services to help a company shut down. From the point of view of stakeholders, which again are the third parties that are calling you in, you have, from the standpoint of either a lender, private equity, or even a board director, the management of the company that's, sweating I will say the illness at the moment, independent people want an independent point of view because they want to make sure that management that may or may not have gotten them into the situation that they're in, because they're so focused on it, may need an independent perspective just to validate that everything's okay. Helping them develop plans, helping them actually get out of the trouble. If you're in an insolvency proceeding, you will help perhaps the creditors, not only the debtors. You could be an advisor to the debtor if an institution asked you to be. You could help purchasers that want to buy pieces of the company and doing due diligence. Again, helping advisors for liquidation, or again, providing wind up and wind down services. You may end up having one of your clients acquire a piece of that company and you liquidate certain pieces to optimize value. So does anybody have any questions? Okay, now we're going to move to Adrian. Adrian's going to talk to you about legal services in this context.
Yeah, thank you very much, Marta. Well, as you already mentioned, what I did is after reviewing this treat model, I came to account that, for example, in the triage part of the treat model, if you want to give a very good advice to the client, you have to make a multidisciplinary approach. So all the attendants, be very clear that if you want to measure the financial risk, you have to take into account also the legal risk. The legal risk that the company are managing derived from the distress business, of course, it will take the legal position of the company to take in mind. Sorry. So what I was trying to say, and sorry for that, is that, well, what I want to propose you is a specific model where you can measure also legal risk. If you want to go to the other slide, please. So in the treat model, there are two specific parts in the triage. The first one is when you make the triage analysis, also we can do a due diligence of the legal risk that the company are going right now, and also a legal analysis about the scenarios that we have to measure about this legal risk. So how can we do it? And next slide, please. I don't want to be or to make a deep explanation about insolvency legal procedures, because of course it will be depending on the local law of each country. But what we are proposing is a specific international standard procedure, which is the ISO 31022. Actually, it was released on May of this year, and it proposed a specific guideline to manage the legal risk. So the main purpose of this guideline is to be aware that the first step that you have to do to measure the legal risk is to establish the relevant context and criteria. What is that? Well, we have to measure the external and the internal of the company context, which are involving this specific distress financial issue for the company. Then you have to assess the legal risk, and then you have to make the treatment of this legal risk. I don't have the time to go through all the steps, but in general terms, they are the three main issues that you have to consider to make the procedure of legal risk management. The next one. So when we are talking about defining the legal risk criteria, and Marta also mentioned in the financial aspect, we have to measure and identify and define how to evaluate a significant and acceptable level of legal risk or group of legal risk. So we have to be very clear that it will be a different legal risks derived from the distressed financial position. Then we have to make an identification of legal risk. What does that mean? Well, the purpose of identifying the legal risk is to find and recognize that also legal risk can help or prevent organizations to achieve or from achieving its objective. Sorry. So we have to make a very clear identification. I am going to show you next a way that we can manage and the identification of legal risks. But the next step, I think it's one of the most important one. Sorry, can you go back to the other slide? Sorry.
Sorry.
No. The third thing that we have to take in account is the likelihood of events related to legal risk. Of course, it implies an analysis regarding what's the possibility of actually going to the legal risk that we are measuring. Then we have to consider the consequences of events related to the legal risk. Of course, there are going to be different types of benefits or losses, financial, about the risks that we measure. And finally, as I mentioned, the treatment of legal risks. So the treatment will also, after selecting and implementing what's the appropriate treatment, well, we are going to develop an implementation of the legal risk treatment. The next, please. So if you can see in this slide, actually it's a matrix that is proposed in the legal risk procedure that I was talking about, the ISO procedure, and it is called the identification matrix of the legal risk analysis. And what it is proposed is that you have to bear in mind some specific categories of risk. The first one is unpredictable, and of course it means that the legal risk context can arise depend on the organization faces in the law and in environment that it's external to the company. And just I think there is a very clear unpredictable legal risk right now in all the world, that is coronavirus. No, we couldn't measure that coronavirus will be not only a financial distress but also a legal distress, because of course the company is well, the companies that are in distress situations, well, they are having problems to comply with all the contracts that they have in place. Non-compliance with applicable laws, it's also a very important category because, well, for example, in that specific case, I can put anti-money laundering obligations that derive from this distress financial of the companies. Well, we can not comply with all the regulatory obligations. Breach of contract, of course, is maybe the most common one. For example, the labor contracts of the company. Impairment of rights, an example of that could be, for example, intellectual property that the company can comply derived from this distress, and also omission in exercising rights, for example, social security rights that the company have to comply with the employees, and improper choice. After you have measured the legal risk, if you have two or more ways to proceed, if you decide from the for the improper option, well, that's going to be a risk that you have to measure. So we have to divide it in different business activity in the companies, and with that we can make a more established plan regarding the risks that we can find in the legal area.
So now we go back and talk about the different types of insolvency that you can see. And again, in each country, how the legal definition of insolvency is defined, and in different parts of the respective countries, there may be different types of definitions. But generally, we see three different types of tests. One is a strict balance sheet test where equity is negative, meaning liabilities exceed assets, and then two types of cash flow test. One, which is a working capital test, which is basically as of a point in time, do liabilities exceed assets? And on a cash flow basis, and again, these would be short-term liabilities, which really deals with the capacity of the entity to be able to meet its obligations. And also in certain circumstances, we see a year window for cash flow being put together for that purpose, so that you would be looking at your obligations for that year and determining, determining what, whether the company can actually pay those debts on at the appropriate time. And if they cannot, they would be presumed to be insolvent.
Marta,
Sorry?
sorry, before you move on to that particular part about the test of insolvency, there's a question from the audience.
Oh, please, I don't see the question, so I apologize.
No, not at all. There was a question which talks about how do you secure fees when dealing with insolvent companies?
Well, you have to be very mindful, again, of the law within your jurisdiction. If you are working with a company that's insolvent, retainers and frequent billing is good. I have seen companies actually require, professionals require weekly billing, particularly for a company that is very insolvent. Another way to get funded is using the financial institution that brings you in as a method of capital. If somebody wants you to go in there and actually create a plan because they know the company's in trouble, like a private equity firm, and they're willing to fund that effort, that's another way to get paid. But if you're going to look at the debtor, and you want to play on that side of the table, and what I mean by that side of the table is oftentimes when entities go into a legal insolvency process, there's a bright line that's drawn. And if you are not independent, which means that you are owed money from the company as a creditor at the time of insolvency, you are deemed an interested party because you are reliant on the liquidation of whatever assets and operations are left to be able to be paid. So therefore, you're not independent. So, what you look for is, if you're going to be in this process, you need to be cognizant of where you want to play. If you're going to help them through the insolvency and you can bill frequently, you do it. But I wouldn't ever take on this work without a retainer, a sizable retainer. And in my mind, in my mind, a sizable retainer is probably a week's worth of work, at least.
Right.
Sorry, Marta, I was just going to add that obviously part of the work, if we're talking about maybe restructuring and turnaround, obviously whatever we do is going to help the companies. So one of the most attractive points for them to hire us would be to say, look, whatever you're going to pay us, you're going to be saving it in terms of what we're going to help you in terms of getting you through the process. So as Marta says, for sure, we have to get a big upfront retainer and just make sure that we're getting paid as we go along. But I think you know, the big sell from us is that we're going to get you through this, and that, you know, whatever savings that we're going to bring along in the process would be greater than the cost of our services.
And that's an excellent point, John. Another structure that I've seen, depending on the risk appetite of the firm, is that they take their payment in form of cash and then a success fee. And that success fee can be based on a percentage of savings. It can be based on a percentage of savings plus the achievement of milestones. That's why I mentioned before that visible toll gates are important, because you can tie payments and success fees to visible toll gates. So what that does is when you do that, you're aligning the interest of the professional and the company. But from the perspective of the professional, if you're going to embark on that, you need to know a couple of things. Not everything works out the way one would want it to, so there's much an element of risk. If you're going to take it on, my advice to you is be in control of the process and be allowed to make the decisions that get you to the finish line. If you sign up to a deal like that, but they retain all the authority, I don't think you're going to get your success fee. So there are some companies that take it with three forms. They take the fees, a success fee, and they take stock. If you're going to take stock, you are now not independent from the company. So definitely if you go into an insolvent situation, you're not going to be able to help them on the other side. And if you're not independent, you can't do the audit. So again, depending on your firm's risk appetite and how they go about things, there are many ways to skin this. But I don't think you should take a success fee until you've looked at, and typically the success fee issue comes up after you have done the first phase of your work, which is you get in and figure out what the devil's going on in the company.
That's a valid point, and that's been my experience, at least in the Thailand market, is you review the company and make sure there's enough cash to pay your fee as well as a success fee, contingent fee. And I'm looking at Philip and Jared and the rest of the guys in New Zealand. Is that something that's typically followed in your market as well?
I'm trying to see them and I can't see them, so get out of them.
Yeah, I think Jared's
find you. I can't even
mute.
find
He's
them anymore.
trying to unmute.
Yeah.
That's one. Why don't we save that conversation for later?
I'm trying to see if I can see them, and I've lost the entire screen. All I see is the PowerPoint. So you're going to have to speak up for me while we're going through if people want to say something or have a question, okay?
Right. Yeah, no, I got a comment from Jared saying they occasionally get security from the secured creditors when doing this work.
That's right. So financial institutions oftentimes, when they want somebody to go in and assess their credit, and assess the credit worthiness of the company, that's how they fund you. So that is a very good way to start. If you want to start on a more secured basis, market to your friends in financial institutions. Anything?
Thank you, Marta.
Sorry, anything else on that point?
No, so we can proceed.
So now we go back to this screen, and at this point, what we want to talk about is what reality is. And reality is in the eye of the beholder. If you think about your role as being a parent, and somebody asks you, do you think your child's beautiful? Oftentimes, parents think everything's perfect. Well, management and the officers of companies are the same way. They have a public face, and sometimes they have a private face. And oftentimes what you see is that the CFO and the CEO or COO are having fights behind the scenes because the company's in corporate distress. Yet to the world, they project that everything's okay. They project the same thing to the shareholders, but the numbers are looking different. The challenge with that is shown in this chart, which is that, you know, they're going along reporting that things are okay, but in actuality, the cliff and the crisis is starting to deepen, and it deepens quickly. And what oftentimes you will find is when you are doing the assessment, that the difference between what they said outside and what's really happening is a pretty big gap. And that gap creates extremists that when you come in the door, you're faced with and having to help them accept. And that's the issue of accepting reality. The other problem is that sometimes there's a CEO that believes that everything is really okay, and they refuse to acknowledge that there's anything going on. And sometimes that's a very dangerous thing. And having you come in, for example, for a financial institution, and detecting that dichotomy is critical, because the bank may not be really hearing what's really going on with the company. And that time, as that time passes, what it begins to do is foreclose the ability of that company to be able to react to a successful turnaround. So you can see from this chart that you could be a superior turnaround strategist and you can implement turnaround strategies. And there are basically four outcomes that can come from that. It could be a sustained recovery, patient gets wheeled out, everything's good, and they go back rehab and they're walking. Mere survival. The patient gets taken at the point of its depth and crisis, and it's really hard to pull them out. And you pull as we would call the Hail Mary in a pass, and that happens. They're alive, but barely. Or they're limping along and they never fully recover and end up going through a restructuring, a sale, or a dissolution later on. You also have the situation where there's a short-term survival and then they die, or they just don't get out. And what's important to understand is the earlier in the downturn that you can get that company, the better shot you have to have the more positive recovery. And now for our third polling question. Which of the following services are you capable of providing professional advice on?
Well, I'm sure you probably can answer more than one, but I think it only allows you to pick one option. So
That's right. Pick your best one. Well, good. We have a little bit of everybody here, so that's important. So we have some restructures, some consulting, and some insolvency. I would posit that we underutilize in all our firms people that know restructuring, and those people should actually be applied to our audits and our other consulting engagements, because they can help generate ideas that you can sell as further consulting work to your clients. So for my last commentary, before I turn it over to my dear friend John, I want to just talk a little bit about this, because I mentioned in that slide that timing is everything. So there's two ways to behave. You can ignore the signal or face it as it comes. More time is better. Denial of signals and being transparent with shareholders, stakeholders, suppliers gives you credibility and that you're being realistic, and allows for external brainstorming, which I think is important as you're trying to increase the chance for success of the company. Only focusing on self-preservation often does not lead to that result, and ends up burning a lot of the bridges if you're trying to save the institution. So being proactive and taking control of what you can do is really important. And when you promise too much or promise unrealistic things or have not done your diligence, you end up losing credibility with the stakeholders, which often accelerates the fact that you won't be in that position for very long. Any comments or questions? Okay, John, your turn.
good. I think we got a question, another polling question, which I think is an easy one.
Wow,
Oh, wow.
pretty amazing.
So you guys are going to be busy. Yeah, we see the same here. I mean, we see a lot of, business in trouble. We put up this slide here, which I'm sure is probably not so different when we go from country to country. We look at low, moderate, and high risk. Obviously, things like retail, you got food, for instance, which I think most people have never had so much food in their lives because they're working from home. But then when you get to the high end, we'll say high-end consumer products, fashion is suffering a lot, no? And obviously one of the big challenges here has been online, no? People like Amazon just went, this was the best thing that ever happened for them. And then you've got all of the bricks and mortar traditional companies which thought they had models for doing online deliveries and online sales and so on. A lot of them were just found out and they were not ready. So they just went into massive crash mode and have been trying to move on to online models in terms of selling online. So that's a huge opportunity. Technology is part of all of that. So when we look at the top piece, low risk industries, technology is obviously huge. Healthcare, pharma, farms, hospitals, clinics, and then hospitals, it varies. A lot of hospitals where it's planned surgeries have just been going through a difficult time because the focus is on COVID. So it's been a kind of a mixed bag there, but anybody involved with, cleaning gels, cleaning products is doing extremely well, gloves and so on. Real estate as well, depending on the real estate, things like cinemas, shopping malls are just going through a horrible time and just massive closures. So moving on, this was on the 21st of October. So this was a study which came out, was published in Bloomberg. So I think most of our clients in the Baker Tilly network, I think we're more in the mid-sector, mid-sized companies. So half of Europe's smaller businesses risk bankruptcy within the year. So this is small and medium-sized businesses say they face bankruptcy in the next year if revenues don't pick up. And obviously we're all reading about the vaccines and everybody is expecting, this is really it will obviously help, but we're not sure if this is going to be the solution, the complete solution. And, we see this, I think most people see this going into the second quarter of next year, at least, if not longer, okay? So for 1 in 5 companies in Italy and France anticipate filing for insolvency within 6 months. This is according to McKinsey. So that's also a very interesting statistic. Such businesses are key to the region, accounting for more than 2/3 of the workforce. So a lot of times we kind of think that all the jobs come from the big companies, and not really the case. Places like Italy and Spain obviously have been hit very hard as well. So moving on, the outlook, again here, when we look at optimistic, pessimistic, the red, we see the UK, it's almost 50%. Looking at the SMEs, look at a very or extremely weak outlook, and somewhat weak is almost up to 80%. Germany doesn't look so bad, but the other countries don't look good in terms of the outlook. These are an example. These, I believe, are all US based. A lot of them are global brands. Certainly the US model is very successful, the Chapter 11 model. All of these companies have filed for bankruptcy. These are just retailers. You're probably familiar with many of them: JCPenney's, Neiman Marcus, J. Crew, Brooks Brothers, True Religion, Pier 1, etc. So this has had a huge impact on many of these companies. If we look at their balance sheets, which we're not doing today, but if we were to take a look at these balance sheets, we'll say in February or the end of December last year, we probably found that they weren't that healthy. So typically, these companies would have probably, I don't know about a lot of physical assets, but they certainly would have a lot of investment in malls, shopping centers, but they would have probably, most of them would be working with a lot of debt. So anybody with a lot of debt on their balance sheet and went into this and didn't have weren't able to adjust, are in big trouble. So, you know, there's a list, I think there's even a longer list of more than this, but this is like a sizable list of companies in 2020. So when we look at the drivers, I think we need to talk about, you know, all the time we kind of talk maybe in a negative tone when we talk about this whole thing, about restructuring and insolvency. And let me just mention something which is actually quite positive for us in Mexico and the United States. We're looking at a lot of what we call nearshoring projects. So we're looking at a whole lot of companies, mainly US companies that are sourcing product in Asia and are moving it to Mexico or moving it back to the US. So here in the firm, we're currently looking at, we're helping, you know, one extremely large US corporation. They're looking at moving 80,000 SKUs from principally China, and they're looking to park it in Mexico. So this is a massive company, manufacturing, distribution. They work in the, I guess, like similar to the Home Depot market. They would be suppliers for them. So that for us brings a whole bunch of work, which is resourcing, customs, tax work, tariffs, financial planning, risk analysis. You know, we've done a risk analysis for them, for the country, you know, which is macro, which is economy, exchange rate, sourcing of labor, availability of universities, infrastructure, highways, access to the US. So that's just an idea or an example of one very large project. And this is a joint collaboration between Baker Tilly US and Baker Tilly Mexico. So it's a huge opportunity. Why is this happening? To shift product, to shift a container from China to the US takes 5 weeks. From Mexico to the US takes 1 week. And the cost is about a third. So that's just one example. It's a big saving in cost. COVID came along and shut down the supply chain. So the ships stopped. So you had all these companies all of a sudden, like they couldn't get product to the customer. So this is just one example of opportunity that this can bring. So when we look at the drivers here, I think the example here would kind of help us and look at, you know, market demand. Obviously, a lot of things can happen. A lot of things will have happened because of this. I believe that there's not one person or one company in the world whose plans didn't change because of COVID. So during, during 2020, every company has had to redo their planning. So the plan that they had back in January, February went out the window. So what they had to do was to kind of redo all their plans. So whether this was, you know, depending where you are, if you're renting space, it's probably good news because you can downsize and you're working from home. So you can do things much more agile, use technology, which is much cheaper because you just have to buy a whole load of, you know, Zoom licenses, Teams, or whatever you use, okay? The competition just completely changes. The ball game has changed for companies that were ready in terms of new opportunities and others which were just not ready. Like here you can see brick and mortar versus online. That's just a huge example for this year. And the supply chain, I think the example that I gave you is a good example that companies are just realigning where they're going to be buying from and how they can be closer to their customer. Obviously, anything to do with relationship management is vital, whether it's customers or vendors. You need to have your customers close to you and your vendors as well. Anything to do with financing, interest rates. Fortunately, in the world, we're living in a period of low interest rates. Exchange rates, I think that's something we need to look at from country to country, how it affects the dollar, the euro, the yen, and so on. No commodity pricing, business cycles, regulatory environment. Obviously, we've just gone through a process here of renegotiating the North American trade agreement. It's called the USMCA. It changed from NAFTA to USMCA. So the whole tariffs, and we have a big practice here on global trade management. So we do a lot of work with tariffs and a thing we call maquiladora, which is a kind of toll manufacturing, which is a temporary importation where you add value and the product gets shipped back out. Obviously, tax policy. So there's big opportunities here in terms of the moving, and obviously everything that's happening with China and the trade agreements and the tariffs. These are a lot of moving parts for everybody. Anything to do with employee morale, it's key here. I think as part of our advisory, when we talk with companies, obviously we look at the low-hanging fruit, first of all. Anything that we can help our clients to kind of do things quickly, which are big benefits and don't cost a lot, you just do it, okay? So I think what's happened with COVID over this year, I think people who were facing retirement got retired. People who were, 2 years to go probably have been retired as well. So all of the new hires have been frozen. And obviously the rock stars, if we have in management or throughout the workforce, these people need to be retained and held on board because talent is vital in this whole processes. Good teamwork is vital, and obviously anything to do with fragmentation and working in silos is not very, very good. Labor supply and supply chain. When we did this analysis for the nearshoring, we basically broke out. We have a whole bunch of different manufacturing regions throughout the country. I think Mexico is the third largest exporter in automobiles worldwide. So it's really important to be able to have access to whether it's qualified labor force or maybe it's just low skilled workforce. So this is very important. Let's not get into too much financial metrics because we're going to get into that, but I would say keep everything as variable as possible. I think, Martha, you jumped ahead there.
I apologize.
Yeah, just go back one as well, sorry. We're obviously going to look at it a bit more detail in financial metrics, but I think, Martha made a very good point where we need to have the thermometer all the time. We need to have these, whether it could be like 2 or 3 key indicators. I would say in this whole process, probably, I would say number 1, 2, and 3 would be, number 1 would be, for me, would be liquidity. Number 2 is liquidity, and number 3 would be liquidity. I'm obviously exaggerating, but cash is really vital in this whole process. So maybe we can move on. Probably all of us have experience with internal controls. Internal controls / fraud. Sometimes when we're on the slippery slope and the company is close to restructuring or is in a very bad shape, maybe it's a bit too late at that point. But it's really important that we have these processes and we have these controls in place. And maybe I would say that it would probably be more advisable to work in internal controls post, getting the patient out of the hospital and back home, and then sort of say, well, what are the things that we should fix from now on? Because if we're in a process of survival, putting in fancy controls and processes is probably not really interesting for the CFO. He's going to be saying, well, okay, let's talk about that in 60 or 90 days when we can get beyond this, no? Obviously, anything to do, with project management, it depends where this is. I would say when we get into what we typically tell clients is that if you've got a huge investment in CapEx and you've just got, if you've got 90% of the money spent, and this is going to be a big help for your business, spend the other 10%. So if it's something that you're about to start and it's going to have a payoff in 1 or 2 years, it's probably something that you should put off. So it's kind of really, I would say, horses for courses. You need to be able to not make general rules, but you would need to look at each individual one on its own. So it obviously needs to do the usual things, which is return on investment, the payback period. And if you've got a huge investment that you can turn it up, you can get the payback in 1 or 2 years, it probably makes a lot of sense, but you need to get through this first, okay? Revenue generation is vital to keep the business going. So it might be good to increase prices. It could be good to decrease prices depending on what the situation that you're in. You might just want to keep, ticking over for the 3 months or 6 months to get out of this. So you might be looking at some discounted prices, get in cash, get the turnover on your receivables. Or you may have a unique position in the marketplace where you don't have a lot of competition, so you may not want to reduce prices. So I would say it depends on your situation, okay? So moving on.
John, sorry,
yes.
Before we move on, I was wondering if we could take a short 10-minute break. We've been in about an hour and we've scheduled for 2 breaks. So would that be okay if we all take a break?
Sure.
Yeah, I know it's 5 a.m. for me in Singapore, so I could definitely use a fresh cup of coffee.
Wow. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. We'll be back in about 10 minutes. Thank you.